The order was simple, and you remember giving it. Leave one alive to carry the wound home. You were the warden of the ninth Talon, and your people did not call that mercy. They called it instruction. When the Veshikar war host crossed into a new sky, it did not erase a species in silence. It chose one survivor from each broken fleet, and let that survivor limp back to its kind, half dead, with the story burned into it. The galaxy learned your name the way a child learns fire, by the single hand that came back scarred. So when your 300 war barges closed on the last human hull at the edge of the Sable Drift, you did what custom required. You picked the smallest, ugliest, most broken ship on the field, and you marked it to live. It was a scout, a corvette, 410 meters of patched gray plate, with one cracked engine cone, and a name stenciled along its flank, in human letters, your translators rendered as Long Way Home. It had no business in this fight. The human battle line had already gone dark around it, 90 larger warships dimmed and drifting, and this little scrap was the runt left in the wreckage, the obvious one to spare. You did not know that the runt still had a crew of one breathing inside it. You did not know his name was Petty Officer Eco Ren, helmsman, 20 years old, and that he had not been meant to survive this either. Your champions laughed when they saw the scout. The Veshikar did not win wars with numbers alone, though 300 barges was a wall of iron no sky had ever turned. Your people won by ritual. Your war was a duel made enormous. When two fleets met, the Veshikar did not simply fire. They sent forward a Talon champion, a single great war barge crewed by your finest, and they demanded the enemy answer with one ship of their own. Champion against champion, in the open, while the host watched. A people that refused the duel was named coward and put down without honor, scattered like vermin. A people that accepted and lost was named brave and given the one survivor, the carried wound. That was the whole shape of your civilization, 4,000 years deep. The single combat that decides the many. You had fought this duel 41 times against 41 species. You had won it 41 times. The galaxy knew the rule. Send out your best ship, lose it, and live in the small mercy of one returning hull. Refuse, and die entire. The humans had not refused. That was the thing that should have warned you, and did not. When your herald pulse went out across the Sable Drift, the old ritual challenge that demanded a champion step forward, the human line did not scatter and run as the cowards did. It did not beg as the clever ones did. It went quiet. All 90 ships at once, like a held breath. And then, the smallest, most broken ship on the field had answered the herald. The scout, the runt, Long Way Home. Your Talon champions found that hilarious. A 400-meter scout, cracked and leaking, sliding forward out of the dark line to stand as a people's chosen champion against the greatest war host in the Reach. It was an insult so large it circled back into comedy. The duelist crews opened their channels to one another and made the sound, "Your kind makes for contempt," a low triple click, and the sound filled the drift. Their commander, the first champion of the host, a warrior named Drevoth Sorrel who had broken 9 fleets with his own barge, did not even take the field himself. To meet a scout in single combat would shame him. He sent his youngest blooded champion instead, a barge called Hook of the Morning, and he sent it laughing. You watched from the flag barge, warden of the ninth Talon, and you logged it the way you logged every duel. One human scout, 410 meters, crew presumed dead or near it, answering the herald out of stubbornness or malfunction, outcome certain. Note for the record, the carried wound is already chosen. You wrote that the wound would be the scout. You did not yet understand that the scout was the wound. Eco Ren had not meant to answer the herald. That part is true, and you would never know it. He had been trying to die quietly. He was the last man alive on Long Way Home. The rest of the crew, 41 of them, had been killed in the first 11 minutes when the Veshikar wall came over the human line and the larger ships took the blows meant to keep the small ones breathing. The human flagship, a battleship named Steady Hand, had spent itself shielding the scouts so they could run, and the scouts had not run fast enough, and now Eco Ren sat alone, in a ship full of his dead, with one cracked engine, and a herald pulse screaming, in a language his translator only half understood. The pulse said, in its closest human meaning, "Send your best, or be named nothing." Eco Ren was 19 years and 11 months old. He had enlisted to fly survey routes along the quiet edge of human space, mapping rocks, because he had been good at math and bad at sitting still. He had never wanted a war. He had certainly never wanted to be the last voice of a dead fleet, but the herald kept screaming, and the dead kept drifting in their harnesses around him, and somewhere in the wreck of the larger ships, his crewmates and his captain were going cold in the dark, and the war host that had killed them was sitting in the drift, waiting to be told that humanity would not even stand up. He read the herald 3 times. He understood, slowly, what the Veshikar were asking. They wanted a champion. They wanted one ship to come forward and be killed in front of everyone, so the rest could be spared in their fashion, marked and scarred, and sent home to teach fear. And Eco Ren, alone, 20 years old in 11 days, looked at the 90 dark ships of his fleet and the 300 bright barges of the enemy, and he did the math the way he always did. He worked out that there was no version of this where he lived. He worked out that there was no version where his answer mattered. And he worked out, last of all, that since it did not matter, he was free to give whatever answer he wanted. So he reached forward over the body of his dead captain, and he keyed the channel, and he sent the smallest, ugliest ship on the field forward, to be the champion of a species the galaxy had already decided to scar. He did not send it forward to win. He had no plan to win. He sent it forward because the herald had asked who would stand, and the answer, with everyone else dead, was him. That is the part your kind never recorded correctly, Warden. You wrote that the humans chose their weakest ship out of cowardice or chance. You never wrote the truth, because the truth was unbearable. There was no choosing. There was one man left, in one broken ship, and he stood up. You should know what your champions said to each other in the minutes before the first duel, Warden, because it is the last time your war host laughed, and your people should remember that they were laughing. The crews of Hook of the Morning opened the kill channel, the private feed your duelists used to narrate a kill to the host, and they treated the scout like a joke that had been handed to them as a gift. They called it the runt. They called it the dying crumb. One of them, a gunner, said the human must have answered the herald by accident, that a real champion would never be this small, that the humans were so beaten they had sent their garbage to die. The host echoed the triple click of contempt across the drift, 300 barges making the sound at once, a wall of scorn rolling over one cracked gray ship. They were not cruel for cruelty's sake. Understand that, even now. They were warriors who had won this exact moment 41 times, and the moment had always gone the same way, and so they did what people do when they are certain. They relaxed. They narrated the kill before it happened. They told the host how it would go. The lance, the called blow, the clean opening of the runt, and then the host would witness the skill of it, and the day would end the way every day ended, with the Veshikar champion standing in the circle, and the enemy's survivor chosen to carry the wound. Eco Ren heard the contempt through his broken translator. He did not understand the words, but a tone needs no translation, and the tone was unmistakable. They were laughing at him. The last living man of a murdered fleet, sitting in a cockpit with his dead captain cooling beside him, heard 300 enemy ships laughing at the small, ugly thing he was about to die in, and the records caught what he did with that, and it was nothing. He did not answer the laughter. He did not curse them. He did not make a speech. He simply went on doing what he had been doing, reading his ship, reading their big ship, working the numbers, getting ready to live a little longer. That is a thing your champions never learned to fear, because they had never met it. An enemy who does not care that you are laughing. Your whole war was built on the laughter, in a way, on the certainty that made the laughter possible, on the long 4,000-year habit of being the ones who knew how the duel would end. Laughter is what certainty sounds like, and the human in the scout was the one thing the laughter could not touch, because he had already done the math and already accepted the end, and a man who has accepted the end has nothing left for your laughter to take. When Hook of the Morning fired its first called lance, the kill channel was still narrating the kill, the gunner still describing for the host exactly how the runt would open. The lance went through empty space. There was a pause on the kill channel, a half-second of silence, the first silence. Then the gunner, less certain now, called the second blow, and the second blow missed too, and the silence after it was longer. By the third miss, the kill channel had stopped narrating. By the fourth, the laughter was gone from the whole host. Not because anyone had ordered it gone, but because you cannot laugh at a thing that will not be where you aim, and the contempt of 300 barges had curdled, in under 2 minutes, into something none of them had felt in 4,000 years, which was the cold first edge of doubt. You logged the moment the laughter stopped, Warden. You did not mean to. It was in the ambient channel noise of the host, the triple click of contempt simply ceasing, all across the drift, the way a room of voices goes quiet when something walks in that should not be able to. You have listened to that recording more times than you will ever admit. The moment 300 war barges stopped laughing at a survey ship. It is the exact moment the age of the Veshikar began to end, and not one of your champions knew it, because they were all still sure they were about to win. Hook of the Morning came forward to perform a killing, not to fight one. The young champion barge was 900 meters, more than twice the scout's length, and it carried the lance array that had broken 3 species before this one. Its crew were 200 blooded duelists who had trained since hatching for exactly this moment, the moment when an enemy sends out a champion, and you take it apart in the open so the host can watch and the survivors can learn. They expected a clean kill. The scout was cracked. The scout had one engine. The scout, by every reading your barges took, had a single faint life sign aboard, and a hull that should already have been a tomb. The duel began the way all your duels began, with the host falling silent, and the 2 ships left alone in a marked circle of empty sky, 10,000 kilometers wide, while 300 barges watched and did not interfere. That was the law of the Veshikar. The duel is sacred. The host does not fire while the champions fight. To break the circle was the deepest shame your kind knew. You had never broken it. In 4,000 years, your war host had never once broken the circle, because the circle was the whole reason your conquests meant anything. Without it, you were just numbers, and any swarm has numbers. Eco Ren did not know the circle was sacred, but he learned, in the first 90 seconds, that it existed. He had expected all 300 barges to fire at once. He had braced for it, alone at his helm, the way a man braces for a wall of water. Instead, only one ship came, the big one, the 900-meter barge sliding toward him with its lance array glowing, and the other 299 sat back and watched. He did not understand why. He only understood that for some reason he was being allowed to fight one enemy at a time instead of all of them, and a man who is being allowed to fight one enemy at a time is a man who has been handed something. Hook of the Morning opened with the lance. It was a beautiful weapon by your reckoning, a coherent lance of stripped matter that could open a battleship's spine in a single stroke. The young champion fired it the way the ritual demanded, a called blow, announced across the open channel, so the host could witness the skill of the killing. The Veshikar did not strike from hiding. To strike from hiding was vermin's work. The lance was called, and then the lance was thrown. And the scout was not where the lance went. Eco Ren had flown survey routes for 2 years along the broken edge of human space, threading rocks no warship would risk, because survey ships were small and cheap, and nobody cared if a survey pilot scraped his hull learning to read a gravity well. He had 10,000 hours of flying, the kind of flying that war barges never did, the flying of a thing that is too small to take a hit, and so must simply never be hit. He had spent his whole short career being the smallest thing in every sky he entered. He knew, in his hands, in the part of a pilot that does not use words, exactly how a thing this size moved. The lance went through empty space where the scout had been a half-second before, and Eco Ren put long way home inside the killing arc, close, far closer than any duel had ever been fought, close enough that the great barge could not bring its array to bear without the lance overshooting into the watching host. Your champions had never fought anything that came closer instead of running. Every species your kind had ever dueled had tried to keep distance, because distance was where your lances ruled. The scout did the opposite. It came in under the lance, scraping along the barge's flank like a small fish along the side of a whale, so close that the barge's own weapons could not fire without breaking the circle and hitting the host beyond. Hook of the Morning had trained 4,000 years for a duel at range. It had never once trained for a knife at its throat. Eco Ren was not trying to win. He kept telling himself that, alone in the dark of his cockpit, with his dead captain's body still strapped beside him, he was just flying the only way he knew how to fly, which was small and close and impossible to hit, and he was making the big ship miss, and every time it missed he stayed alive another 10 seconds, and 10 seconds at a time was the only future he had. But a strange thing happens when a small ship refuses to die. The enemy begins to make mistakes. Hook of the Morning, the proud young champion, fired its lance again, called and beautiful, and aimed at where a sane pilot would have to be. Eco Ren was not where a sane pilot would have to be. He was already turning inside the shot, and the lance flew long, 10,000 kilometers of stripped matter screaming out of the circle, and it would have hit the watching host, except that the host's own barges had to scatter to avoid their champion's missed blow. You saw that, Warden. You logged it, first champion's youngest, forcing the host to break formation to dodge his own wild lance. It was a small shame. You noted it as a small shame. You should have noted it as the beginning. The second thing Eiko Ren learned was that the big ship had a blind seam. He had not gone looking for it. He had been too busy staying alive. But 10,000 hours of flying close to things teaches a pilot to read a hull the way a reader reads a face, and as he scraped along Hook of the Morning's flank for the third time, dodging a third called Lance, he saw it. Where the great barge's two main hull sections met, there was a band of lighter plating, a flex joint, the place where a ship this size had to bend a little or break. Every large ship has one. The Scout did not, because the Scout was small enough to be one solid piece. But the barge was 900 meters, and 900 meters cannot be rigid, and so it had a seam. Eiko Ren was a survey pilot. He had spent 2 years firing a survey ship's one weapon, a mining lance meant for breaking rocks, a tool so weak that no warship carried it, because it could not scratch warship plate. Long Way Home still had its mining lance. It was the only gun the Scout had. Against a war barge's armor, it was a joke, a thing that would splash off the main plate like water. But a flex joint is not main plate. A flex joint is the soft band where the ship is allowed to bend. He did not fire right away. He kept flying, kept dodging, kept making the big ship miss, and while he did it, he worked the math the way he always worked the math, alone, 20 years old, the last living human in the Sable Drift. He worked out the angle. He worked out that he would have one pass, maybe two, close enough and steady enough to put the mining lance into the seam. He worked out that even if he hit it perfectly, a survey lance could not kill a war barge, but it could make it bend wrong. The Veshikar champion came at him a fourth time, furious now, the young commander's contempt curdling into something hotter, because the Scout would not die, and the host was watching. Drevoth Sorrel, the first champion, opened a private channel to his youngest, and told him to stop chasing and start killing, and the youngest, shamed, did the worst thing a duelist can do. He stopped being patient. He brought Hook of the Morning around hard for a full broadside, the whole lance array swinging to bear, the killing blow, the called and final stroke that would end the embarrassment. And in bringing the array around hard, he had to flex the joint. Eiko Ren was already there. He had been there for 10 seconds, flying tight against the seam, waiting, the mining lance charged, his dead captain beside him, and his whole fleet dark behind him. When the great barge twisted to fire, the flex joint opened by 1/2 a meter, the soft band stretching, the internal frame exposed for less than a breath. He put the survey lance into the gap. It was not a killing shot. A survey lance cannot kill a war barge, but it did not need to kill. The internal frame of a 900-meter ship is under enormous strain when the ship flexes hard, like the spine of a runner mid-stride, and Eiko Ren did not break the ship. He broke the frame's tension, a single structural spar, the one piece holding the flex against the twist. He had calculated which one. He had 2 years of breaking rocks to know exactly which fracture makes the whole rock come apart along its own weakness. Hook of the Morning tore itself in half. Not from the Scout's weapon, from its own motion. The barge had twisted to fire its killing broadside, and with the key spar gone, the twist kept going, the 900 meters folding along its own flex joint, the two great sections wrenching apart under the strain the ship itself was generating. The lance array fired into nothing. The proud young champion came apart in the marked circle, in front of 300 watching barges, killed by a survey ship with a rock cutter, and the silence that fell across the Sable Drift was the deepest silence your war host had heard in 4,000 years. Eiko Ren did not cheer. He sat alone in his cockpit and watched the big ship die, and felt nothing he could name. He had not meant to win. He still did not think he had won. One barge was dead. 299 remained. He had simply traded a half-second for another half-second, the way he had been doing since the herald first screamed, and the math still ended the same place it always ended. But you, Warden, you understood what he did not. You understood that he had just defeated a champion of the Veshikar in single combat, in the open, before the host, and the law of your people, 4,000 years deep, the law that was the whole reason your wars meant anything, said exactly what happened next. When a champion is beaten, the host must send another. Not all of them. One. The duel is sacred. The circle holds. You had built your entire civilization on a single combat that decides the many. You had never once imagined a many that could be decided by a single combat going the wrong way. So you sent the second champion. You had to. The law gave you no choice. To send the whole host against one scout now, after it had won the duel honorably, would name the Veshikar cowards in front of 41 conquered species, who were all, you knew, listening. The galaxy was watching the sable drift. The carried wounds of 41 broken fleets were watching. The survivors you had so carefully scarred and sent home, all of them tuned to this channel to see the great war host do what it always did. If you broke the circle now, you broke the thing that made you more than a swarm. You broke the reason any of those 41 species had stayed afraid. So Drevath Sorrel, the first champion, sent his second-best barge into the circle. A 900-meter killer called Tide Without Mercy, crewed by veterans, no longer laughing. They had watched the runt break the runt's bigger brother. They came in careful. They came in at range, refusing to be drawn close, keeping the seam joint hidden behind their angle, doing everything right. And Eco Ren, alone, 20 years old in 11 days, with one cracked engine and a survey lance, and a fleet of his dead behind him, watched the second great ship slide into the circle, and did the only thing he knew how to do. He flew small, he flew close, he made it miss. It took him longer this time. Tide Without Mercy was crewed by veterans who had seen the first death, and would not be drawn into the knife range that had killed Hook of the Morning. They kept their distance. They fired careful, conserving lances, trying to herd the scout into the open where a clean shot could end it. For 11 minutes, Eco Ren flew the edge of dying, threading lances that came so close his hull glowed, his cracked engine screaming, his hands the only thing in the universe that knew where the scout would be, in the next half-second. The veterans did not make the young one's mistake. They did not chase. They did not overcommit. They simply could not hit a thing that small, flying that close to nothing, because no Veshikar ship had ever needed to, because for 4,000 years the enemy had always tried to keep distance, and your lances had always ruled the distance. The scout did not keep distance. The scout lived in the place between the lances. And eventually, because a careful enemy that cannot win still has to do something, Tide Without Mercy made the smaller mistake. It moved to cut off the scout's only open lane, a maneuver that required bringing its main reactor vent to face the open sky for 3 seconds. A war barge's reactor vent is armored against weapons. It is not armored against a thing flying close enough to put a survey lance straight down the throat of it at point-blank range, because nothing in 4,000 years had ever been close enough to try. Eco Ren put the rock cutter into the vent. He did not break the reactor. A survey lance cannot break a reactor, but a reactor vent open to the sky, struck at point blank by even a weak lance, does not need to be broken. It only needs to be told to close at the wrong moment. The vent's own safeties read the strike as an internal breach and sealed, trapping the pressure they were built to release, and Tide Without Mercy swallowed its own fire. The second great champion died in the circle, gutted by its own reactor, killed by a survey pilot who had simply put a small weak shot in the one place a small weak shot could matter. 2 barges dead, 2 duels won, 298 remained. And the silence in the sable drift. Warden. The silence was no longer the silence of contempt. It was the silence of a war host beginning to understand that it had walked into a thing it had no ritual for. There is a thing your records never explained, Warden, and you owe it to the truth to set it down now. In the recess after the second death, while the host hung silent and the little gray scout sat alone in the marked circle, the 41 conquered species were not merely watching. They were talking to each other. You did not know that. Your kind had always believed that the carried wounds you sent home stayed apart, each survivor a lonely thing teaching fear to its own people in its own dark corner of the Reach. You never imagined they might compare their wounds, but they did, on quiet channels you had never thought to listen for, and on the day of the Sable Drift, those 41 survivors had all tuned to the same feed at once, because word had gone out that the Veshikar had cornered the humans, and every one of them wanted to watch the war host do what it always did. What they saw instead was a survey ship break a champion with a rock cutter, and then break another, and they began, for the first time in 4,000 years, to ask each other a question they had never dared ask alone. The question was simple: what if the duel can be lost? Every one of those 41 species had knelt because they believed the duel could not be lost. That was the whole machinery of your empire. A people meets the Veshikar, sees the host, hears the herald, and knows, in its bones, that it will send out its champion, and its champion will die, and then it will receive the survivor's mercy, or be scattered as vermin. The knowing was the weapon. You barely needed the barges. You needed only the certainty, passed mouth to mouth across the Reach, that the duel always ended the same way. And on the feed from the Sable Drift, the certainty was dying in real time, 2 champions at a clip, and 41 species were watching it die together. That is why the recess mattered so much, Warden, and why you took it twice. You were not only mourning your champions, you were watching the foundation of your empire crack on a channel you could not silence, and you were trying, in the pause, to find a way to make the crack go away. There was no way. The only thing that could have saved the certainty was for the next champion to win cleanly and fast, and you had no champion who could, because the thing in the scout could not be beaten by winning. It could only be beaten by being killed, and it would not be killed. Iko Ren knew none of this. He sat in the marked circle through both recesses, alone, and he did not understand why the enemy kept stopping. He used the time the only way a survey pilot uses time. He read his ship. Long Way Home was dying around him. He knew it the way he knew everything, by the numbers. The cracked engine cone was running 40% over its rated heat and climbing. The survey lance, his one weapon, had fired twice, and had perhaps 2 more shots in it, before the capacitor that fed it gave out for good. The air was thinning. The hull, scraped raw from flying close to the first 2 barges, had 3 slow leaks he had sealed, and a 4th he could not reach. He had, by his own cold reckoning, somewhere between 40 minutes and 2 hours of ship left, and that was if nothing else broke. He did the math, and he did not flinch from it. 40 minutes to 2 hours. 2 shots in the lance, 1 cracked engine, and out there in the dark, 298 barges and whatever came next. He did not waste a second of the recess on despair. He spent it readying the 2 shots he had left. He spent it studying the 3rd barge as it formed up, the big one, the flagship, looking for the seam, the vent, the keel, the fault line he knew every large thing in the universe had to have. He spent it talking, quietly, to his dead captain, not because he believed the dead could hear, but because saying things out loud helped him think, and the captain had always helped him think when she was alive, and the habit was the last piece of her he had left. He told her what he was seeing. He told her the numbers. He told her he did not think he was going to make it home, and that he was sorry, and that he was going to keep flying anyway, because flying was the only thing left that was his to do. You heard some of that, Warden, on the half-open channel. You did not understand it then. You thought it was a tactic, a champion steeling himself, a ritual of the humankind. It was not. It was a tired young man keeping himself company in the last room of his life. And the difference between those 2 things, the tactic and the loneliness, is the whole difference between why your champions fought and why he did, and it is the reason your champions are dust and he is still flying. You called a recess, Warden. You had the right. The law of the duel allowed the host 1 pause to mourn a fallen champion before sending the next, and you took it twice now, because you needed time to think, and your kind did not like admitting it needed time to think. You opened the scouts' records. Every species your war host met, you studied, because a duel is won as much by knowing the enemy as by killing him. You pulled what your scouts had gathered on humanity in the 3 months since you crossed into their sky, and you read it in the recess, while the host hung silent, and the little gray scout sat alone in the marked circle, waiting, its 1 cracked engine glowing dull. What you read did not comfort you. Humanity, your record said, did not fight by champions. Humanity fought by fleets, all at once, in great ugly brawls with no ritual, and no marked circle, and no carried wound. Your scouts had found it distasteful. A war with no single combat, no moment where one warrior's skill decides the many, just iron against iron until one side had less iron. Your kind had filed humans as crude. A people with no duel was a people with no honor, and a people with no honor was vermin to be put down, which was exactly what you had come to the Sable Drift to do. But your records also said one thing your kind had underlined and not understood. Humanity's smallest ships were flown by people who had been taught, from the first hour, that they could not survive a fair hit. The big human warships traded blows. The small ones never could. So humanity trained its small ship pilots in a single brutal idea. You are too small to be hit. Therefore you must never be hit. Therefore you must fly in the place where the hit is not. Your champions had spent 4,000 years learning to win the duel. The human in the scout had spent his whole short life learning to not be in the place where the killing happens. He had never trained to win a duel. He had trained, every hour, to survive being the smallest thing in the sky. And a duel, you were beginning to see, is just a place where the killing happens. And a man who has trained his whole life to not be in that place is the worst possible thing to send a champion against. You closed the records. You ended the recess. You sent the third champion. You had to keep sending them. That was the trap, and you saw the shape of it now, too late. The law of the duel was a ladder, and once you stepped onto it, you could not step off without falling. Send a champion. Lose. Send another. The circle holds. The host watches. One ship at a time. 41 species had ridden that ladder down to their deaths because the ladder always ended with the Veshikar champion winning the final duel, and the host moving in to claim the carried wound. The ladder had never run the other direction. It was not built to run the other direction. There was no rule in 4,000 years of your law for what a host does when its champions keep losing one by one, because that had never happened, because no enemy had ever been a survey pilot in a scout that could not be hit. Drevoth Sorrel took the field himself for the third duel. The first champion of the Veshikar war host, the warrior who had broken 9 fleets with his own barge, came into the circle in his flag barge, a 1,200-meter killer named Throne of the Long Hunt, the finest ship your people had ever built. He came not laughing. He came in the old way, the proud way, with a called challenge across the open channel, his name and his 9 victories announced for the host to witness, because if anyone could end the embarrassment it was him, and he wanted the host to see him do it. Iko Ren heard the challenge through his half-broken translator. He did not understand most of it. He understood that the biggest ship yet was coming for him, and that the talking before it came was some kind of ceremony, and that the ceremony seemed to matter very much to the enemy. He filed that away. He was a survey pilot. He noticed things, the way a man notices a fault line in a rock, the small weakness that tells you where the whole thing will break. He had been noticing, for 3 duels now, that the enemy would not break their circle. He did not know why. He did not know it was sacred, did not know it was 4,000 years deep, did not know that the whole meaning of the Veshikar rested on it. He only knew, as a fact he could fly by, that no matter how badly he beat their champion, the other 298 ships sat back and watched and did not fire. He had been handed a rule, and a survey pilot's whole life is learning to use the rules of a place to survive a place that wants to kill him. The Sable Drift had a rule: 1 enemy at a time. The rest will not fire while the duel runs. So Iko Ren made a decision that you, Warden, did not see coming, because no carried wound had ever made it before. He decided to make the duel never end. Throne of the Long Hunt came at him, 1,200 meters of the finest warcraft your people had built, crewed by Drevoth Sorrel, and 300 of his blooded best, and Iko Ren did not try to kill it. He had killed 2 champions by finding their one mistake, the flex joint, the open vent. But the first champion's barge would not make those mistakes. Drevoth Sorrel had watched 2 of his ships die, and he had learned, the way a great warrior learns. He kept his distance. He kept his seam hidden. He kept his vents armored. He fought the perfect duel. And Iko Ren, who had never wanted a duel at all, simply refused to let it finish. He flew. He flew the way no Veshikar had ever seen anything fly, small and close and impossible, threading lances, never firing, never trying to win, only staying alive and keeping the great barge engaged, keeping it inside the circle, keeping the duel running, because as long as the duel ran, the other 298 could not fire. As long as he did not lose, the host was frozen by its own sacred law. He had found the fault line in your civilization, Warden, and it was this. Your strength was that you fought one at a time. Your weakness was that you could not stop. For 40 minutes the duel ran. 40 minutes of the first champion's flag barge hunting one cracked scout across a circle 10,000 kilometers wide and never landing the blow. The host watched. The 41 conquered species watched on their distant channels, the carried wounds you had so carefully made, all of them seeing the great Drevoth Sorrel, unable to kill a survey ship. And with every minute that passed, the thing your war host was built on bled a little more, because a champion who cannot finish his duel is not a champion. He is just a large ship, missing a small one, in front of everyone who has ever feared him. Drevoth Sorrel began to come apart. Not his ship. Himself. You heard it on the command channel, Warden. The first champion's voice climbing, the calm of 9 victories cracking, the slow horror of a great warrior, realizing that the scout was not trying to beat him. The scout was trying to embarrass him forever. There was no kill coming. There was only this, a duel with no end, his name announced and his 9 fleets recited, and then 40 minutes of missing a thing too small to hit, in front of the whole galaxy he had spent his life making afraid. And then Drevoth Sorrel did the thing you should have stopped, and did not. He broke the circle. He could not bear it. 41 minutes into a duel he could not win or end. The proudest warrior of the Veshikar, the first champion, opened a channel to the 2 nearest barges and ordered them to fire on the scout, to pin it. To end this, 2 ships, then a third, lances charging, the sacred circle that had held for 4,000 years cracking open, because one great warrior could not stand to be embarrassed by a runt. You had a half-second to stop it, Warden. You were the Warden of the 9th Talon. The circle was yours to keep, and you froze, because you understood, in that half-second, that whichever way you chose, the thing you were was already over. If you let the circle break, you became a swarm, and 41 species would know it, and the fear that ruled them would die. If you held the circle, you handed the scout an endless duel it could not lose, and the fear would die anyway, slower. You did not get to choose. Drevoth Sorrel chose for you, and the lances fired. And Eco Ren, who had been flying for 40 minutes inside a rule he did not understand, felt the rule break. He felt it before he understood it. 3 more lances in the sky, where there should have been 1. The pattern he had been flying by for an hour, the one enemy at a time he had bet his life on, suddenly gone. A lesser pilot would have died in that half-second, caught flat by the change. But Eco Ren was a survey pilot, and a survey pilot's whole gift is reading the sky changing under him and being somewhere else before it finishes changing. He had spent 2 years flying rocks that shifted and gravity that lied. He read 3 lances instead of 1, and he was already moving, already gone, already in the only place in the circle where 4 lines of fire could not all reach. He ended up, by reading and not by luck, directly beneath the belly of Throne of the Long Hunt, point blank, close as a held breath, the first champion's own barge between him and the other lances, so that to fire on the scout now, the host would have to fire through their own flagship. And Eco Ren looked at the great ship's belly, 10 meters above his cracked hull, and he saw what 2 years of breaking rocks had taught him to see. The keel seam, the single long weld where a 1,200-meter ship is joined down its spine, the longest fault line on the largest rock he had ever been handed. He did not fire the survey lance in a burst. He had learned, killing the first 2, that a survey lance is too weak to break warship plate. So he did not try to break the plate. He set the mining lance to its lowest, longest, steadiest setting, the rock cutter's patient mode, the one that does not blast a stone but scores it, a thin, continuous line, drawn slow and deep along the place a rock wants to split. He had cut 1,000 rocks this way. He had never cut a warship, but a keel seam is just a fault line, and a fault line is a fault line whether it is in stone or in the finest ship the Veshikar ever built. He flew the length of Throne of the Long Hunt with the cutter on, drawing one thin, patient line down the flagship's spine, 1,200 meters of slow score along the one weld holding the great ship together, while above him the host could not fire for fear of killing their own first champion, and Drevoth Sorrel's voice rose into a sound your kind had no word for. The flagship did not explode. It came apart the way a scored rock comes apart, slow and total. Along the line it had been built to never split. 1,200 meters of the finest warcraft the Veshikar ever made, opening down its keel like a seed, the first champion and his 300 best spilling into the dark, killed by a survey pilot with a rock cutter who had simply found the longest fault line and drawn his patient thumb along it. 3 barges dead now from the duels, the flag barge dead with them, and the circle, the sacred circle, 4,000 years deep, broken not by the human, but by your own first champion, in front of the whole watching galaxy. You sat in the silence after, Warden, and you understood that the war was already lost, and that the scout had not even been trying to win it. The scout had been trying to stay alive. The losing was something your own law had done to you, the moment you sent the first champion against a thing that could not be hit and would not stop. You should record too what the charge sounded like from inside your own host, because the record your people kept afterward made it sound like a battle, and it was not a battle. It was a panic with engines. The captains of your barges had spent their whole lives in the certainty of the duel. Not one of them had ever fought in a mass charge, because your kind forbade it, called it the thing only swarms did, drilled it out of every warrior from the first hour. When the order came to charge, after the first champion died and the circle broke, those captains did the most dangerous thing a trained warrior can do. They tried to do a thing they had been taught their whole lives to despise, and they tried to do it all at once, with no practice, in fear, against the one enemy who lived in the gaps between them. You could hear it on the host channel, Warden, the captains calling positions that meant nothing, because they had no formation language for a charge. The collisions, each one announced too late by a crew that had not known to watch its neighbor. The growing edge of something your kind did not have a word for. The sound of proud warriors, realizing that the discipline they had been so sure of did not exist for the thing they were now trying to do. 4,000 years of training to fight one at a time is 4,000 years of not learning to fight together, and the bill for that came due in the sable drift, all at once, in 10 minutes. The human did not cause the panic. He only refused to leave the place where the panic lived. There is a thing survey pilots understand that warriors do not, and it is this. When you are the smallest object in a crowded sky, you do not survive by being faster or stronger. You survive by understanding that everyone around you is afraid of hitting each other, and by living in the exact place where that fear is sharpest. A survey pilot spends years flying through debris fields and rock streams and the wakes of larger ships, learning that the safest place in a crowded sky is often the most crowded place, because that is where everyone else is being most careful. Eco Ren took that lesson, the lesson of the debris field, and he carried it into the heart of a war host, and the war host, which had never flown crowded and did not know how to be careful, tore itself open around the careful little ship in its middle. He flew the way a stone falls through a tower of cards, not by force, by being in the one place that makes the whole tower come down. And while he flew it, he kept doing the thing that broke your people more than any weapon could have. He kept not firing. The survey lance had 2 shots left, and he did not spend them on the charge, because he did not need to, because the charge was killing itself, and a survey pilot does not waste a shot on a thing that is already dying. So the record your barges carried home was a record of 110 great warships destroyed by a single scout that, in the whole of the charge, fired not one weapon. Your captains could not even tell their own people that they had been beaten by guns. They had been beaten by flying, by a thing too small to hit, in the place where they could not help hitting each other. There was a moment, Warden, perhaps 4 minutes into the charge, when one of your barge captains understood and tried to tell the others. You have the recording. A veteran commander named Sethra Vol, a good warrior, watching her neighbors grind into wreckage, came onto the host channel and said the one true thing anyone in your host said that day. She said, "Stop chasing it." She said, "The chasing is the killing." She said, "Hold still and it cannot make us hit each other, only hold still." She was right. If your entire host had simply stopped, gone dead in the sky, the scout could have done nothing. It had no weapons that could break a barge. It could only turn your motion against you. A motionless host would have been a wall the scout could not crack, and you could have waited it out, let the cracked engine die, let the air run thin, let the human simply expire in the silence of his dying ship. But a host in panic cannot hold still, Warden. That is the cruelty of it. Seth Ravol gave the only order that could have saved your fleet, and not one captain in 20 could obey it, because the thing flitting through their middle was too frightening to ignore, and every instinct your warriors had, the instinct of 4,000 years, screamed to turn and chase and kill the small thing now. So they chased, and the chasing was the killing, exactly as she said, and Seth Ravol herself died 9 minutes later, when 2 barges turning to chase the scout caught her flag between them and crushed it, and her last transmission was not a curse at the human, but a curse at her own host, for not listening, for not holding still. You listened, Warden. You were the only one who listened, and you gave the order to pull back, the order she had been begging for, and it came 11 minutes too late, because by then, there was no host left to pull back, only a scattering crowd of frightened giants, and one small gray ship that had never raised its voice. The host did not know what to do, and that, Warden, was the most dangerous thing of all. A war host of 300 barges is a terror as long as it knows what it is. Yours had known what it was for 4,000 years. It was the sacred duel made enormous, the single combat that decides the many, the carried wound sent home to teach fear. Every barge in your host knew its place in that shape, and in the span of 1 hour, a survey pilot in a cracked scout had taken the shape away. The first champion was dead. The circle was broken, by your own hand, before the whole galaxy. There was no ritual now for what the host was. It was just 297 barges, and one little gray ship that would not die, and no one aboard any of those barges knew, in that moment, what they were anymore. You should have run. You see that now. A war host that has lost its meaning should withdraw, regroup, become something new in the quiet. But your kind did not run, ever, because running was the one shame deeper than breaking the circle. And so the host did the only thing a frightened host does when its meaning is gone. It charged. All of it. 297 barges, with no champion left to lead them, and no circle left to hold them, surged forward at the scout at once, the way humanity had always fought, and the Veshikar had always despised. Iron against iron, no honor, no duel, just the wall of numbers coming down on one small ship to crush it, and make the horror stop. You charged because you were afraid. You will never write that in any record, but it is true. The carried wounds of 41 species were watching. The fear that ruled your reach was dying by the second, and the only thing left that might save it was to bury the scout so completely that no one would remember the 3 duels it had won, only the moment the host finally fell on it and made an end. Eco Ren watched the wall come. He was tired in a way that had no bottom. He had been flying for over an hour at the edge of dying, alone, his dead crew drifting behind him in the dark, his hands cramped on the controls, his cracked engine running hotter than any engine was meant to run. He had won 3 duels he had never meant to fight, and now the rule he had survived by, the one enemy at a time, was gone, and the whole host was coming, all of it, a horizon of iron filling his sky. A lesser man would have sat still and let it end. He had earned an end. 3 champions of the greatest war host in the Reach, dead by his hand, and no one in human space would ever even know. He could have stopped flying and let the wall take him, and called it more than enough. He did not stop flying. He did the math instead, the way he always did, even now, even this tired. He looked at 297 barges charging in a wall, and his survey pilot's mind. The mind that had spent 2 years reading how things move through a sky that wants to kill them, saw what the Veshikar in their fear could not see. A wall of ships charging together is not 300 ships. It is one shape, and a shape made of ships flying close has a fault line, the same as a rock, the same as a flex joint, the same as a keel seam. The fault line of a charging fleet is the place where its own ships will run into each other if just one of them moves wrong. The Veshikar had never flown like this. That was the thing. Your war host had fought by champions for 4,000 years. Your barges had never trained to charge in a mass, because your kind found the mass dishonorable, a thing only humans and vermin did. So when the host abandoned its sacred duel and charged, it charged badly, clumsily. 300 huge ships that had never practiced flying shoulder to shoulder, all surging at one point at once, each one watching the scout and not its neighbors, every barge a half-second from clipping the barge beside it. Eco Ren did not fly away from the wall. He flew into it. He flew into the front of the charging host, into the narrowing gaps between the great barges, the smallest thing in the sky threading the place where the giants nearly touched. And he did the one thing a survey pilot is better at than any warrior alive. He flew so that the enemy, trying to hit him, had to move. And when a barge that has never flown in formation moves suddenly to track a scout flitting between its neighbors, it clips the barge beside it. The first collision was an accident, 2 barges swinging to fire on the scout and catching each other's flanks, a grinding tear of plate that crippled both. Eco Ren saw it happen and understood it completely, the way he understood a fault line, and he began, deliberately, tired beyond words and perfectly clear, to make it happen again. He flew the seams of the charge. He put himself in the half-meter gaps where 2 barges nearly met, and he hung there a half-second longer than was safe, so that both barges turned their lances inward to catch him, and both barges, turning, met each other instead. He was a stone dropped into the gears of a machine that had never been built to have a stone in it. He did not fire a shot. He did not need to. The host was so large and so unpracticed, and so afraid, that it began to destroy itself trying to destroy him. Great barge grinding into great barge, lances meant for the scout tearing into the hulls of brothers, the whole clumsy wall folding inward on the small fast thing it could not catch. You watched it from the flag warden, with the first champion dead and no one left to give the order to stop. 297 barges had charged. Now they were colliding, scores of them, the careful war host that had never once flown in a mass tearing itself open because it had finally, in its fear, tried to be the thing it always despised. The human had not beaten your fleet was beating itself, and the human was only the reason. 40 barges crippled in the first 10 minutes, 60. The charge had no shape because it had never had a shape, because your kind had thrown away the only shape you knew, the duel, and replaced it with a brawl you had never learned to fight. And a survey pilot, the smallest thing in the sky, the thing trained from the first hour to live in the place where the killing is not, threaded the brawl and let it kill itself. He still was not trying to win. You have to understand that, Warden, because it is the thing that broke your people most. He was not executing a battle plan. He had no battle plan. He was a tired 20-year-old flying the only way he knew how, small and close and impossible, and the consequence of the only way he knew how, against a host that had abandoned its own discipline in fear, was that the host fell apart around him. He was not a war god. He was a survey pilot who would not stop flying, and that was so much worse, because a war god you could have understood. The host began to break, not in body now but in will. Barges peeled off the charge, not retreating. Your kind did not retreat, but slowing, faltering. Captains who had watched their neighbors grind into wreckage no longer willing to push into the seam where the scout hung waiting. The wall came apart from the inside, the back ranks slowing while the front ranks tangled, the whole great terror of the Veshikar war host losing its forward weight, because you cannot charge a thing that turns your charge into a pile-up, and some animal part of 290 captains understood that, before their pride would let them say it. And in the slowing, the breaking, Eco Ren found the center. He had been working toward it without naming it, the way a man working a fault line works toward the keystone without thinking the word. The center of the charging host, the densest knot of barges, was the place where the most ships flew closest together, and so it was the place where one small ship in the wrong gap would cause the most collisions. He drove for it. Cracked engine screaming, hull glowing, his dead captain still beside him, the last living human in the sable drift, drove the smallest ship on the field, straight into the heart of the largest war host the Reach had ever known, and the heart, packed tight with great barges that had never flown this close, came apart around him in a chain of collisions that lit the dark for 10,000 kilometers. 80 barges gone, 100. The host was no longer a host. It was a panicked crowd of enormous ships, each one a danger to the next, all of them tied to the one small fast thing in their middle that they could not hit and could not flee, and could not stop turning to chase. And every turn to chase it killed another of their own. You gave the order at last, Warden, the order you should have given an hour before. You ordered the host to pull back, to open the range, to stop the collisions by simply ceasing to charge. It was the only sane order. And it came too late, because a crowd in panic does not pull back in good order, it scatters, and a scattering host is a host that has given up. And 41 watching species saw the great HFY war host scatter from a single human scout, and the fear that had ruled the Reach for 4,000 years died in that moment, completely, and did not come back. The barges that could break away, broke away. They did not flee toward the scout's fleet, the dark 90 hulls of dead humans. They fled toward open sky, toward home, toward anywhere the small gray ship was not. 110 barges had been destroyed or crippled in the charge, all of them by their own collisions, not one of them by a weapon the scout fired, because the scout had fired only 3 shots in the whole battle, and all 3 had been with a rock cutter. The rest, you must remember to your dying day, the rest your own host did to itself, trying to kill a survey pilot who would not stop flying. And in the scattering, in the broken sky full of fleeing barges and tumbling wreckage, Long Way Home came to a slow stop in the center of the ruin, its cracked engine guttering, its hull glowing dull red, one survey lance spent down to nothing. Eco Ren sat in his cockpit, 20 years old in 11 days, and watched the greatest war host in the Reach run from him across the dark, and he did not understand, even then, that he had won. He thought he had simply survived another half-second, and another, until somehow, the half-seconds had added up to an empty sky. He was too tired to feel it. He looked at the body of his captain strapped beside him, and he said something. The records caught it on the open channel without meaning to. A small human thing. He said, "We held." He said it to the dead. There is one more thing the record needs, Warden, and it is the part your people understood last and best, which is what the scout did not do. It did not pursue. When your host scattered, broken, and fleeing across the sable drift, the human had every reason and every opportunity to chase the wreckage and finish the kills. A war god would have. A thing that fought for glory would have driven the fleeing barges into each other the way it had driven the charging ones, hunted the panic to its end, made the ruin total. The dark was full of crippled barges, their crews helpless, their hulls open, easy. Eco Ren had a clear field and a host that no longer knew how to defend itself. He let them go. He did not let them go out of mercy exactly, and he did not let them go out of weakness, though his ship was a dying ember. He let them go because chasing was not flying, and finishing kills was not surviving, and he was a survey pilot who had been doing one thing for 2 hours, staying alive, and the moment the sky around him emptied of threats, the staying alive was done, and there was nothing in him that wanted to turn the staying alive into a hunt. He had never been hunting. He had been holding, and when the thing he was holding against ran away, he simply stopped, because there was nothing left to hold. Your kind could not understand that for a long time. You came from a people whose whole war was the finishing blow, the called kill, the carried wound. The idea of an enemy who could destroy your host and then simply let the survivors flee, not out of softness but out of a complete absence of any wish to chase, was a thing your warriors turned over and over for years and could not make fit. In your war, the one who could finish always finished. That was strength. A strength that did not finish was not strength to you. It was a riddle. The riddle was the answer, Warden. The reason the human let your host flee is the same reason the human could not be beaten, and it is the same reason the HFY are not a terror anymore. He was not fighting for the kill. He never had been. He was fighting to keep the people he loved from being erased without anyone standing up for them, and the moment that was secured, the moment the threat scattered and the dead behind him were no longer in danger of being forgotten, the fight was over for him, completely. There was no glory to be chased, no enemy to be punished, no fleet to be wiped out for the satisfaction of wiping it out. There was only a tired young man, a dying ship, and 41 people in the cold of the aft hold who needed to go home. You watched him choose the dead over the kill, Warden, and that is the moment you stopped being able to tell yourself you had been beaten by a weapon. A weapon would have finished you. He turned away from finishing you to go take care of his dead, and a people that turns away from an easy kill to honor its dead is a people you have no ritual for, no herald that can challenge it, no carried wound that can teach it fear, because it has already faced the only thing your fear was ever made of, which is the erasure of the people it loves, and it did not break. When the long-range telemetry of the Sable Drift finally reached the deep councils of the Reach, the 41 species who had watched the feed did not talk about the 3 duels. They talked about the part at the end, the part where the small gray ship turned away from the helpless fleeing barges and went quiet and set its course for home with its dead aboard. That was the part that unknelt them, not the killing, the not killing. A galaxy that had knelt to the Veshikar because the Veshikar always finished, now understood that there was a kind of strength that did not need to finish, that was stronger precisely because it did not need to. And once a people has seen that, it can never again be fully afraid of a people that does. Eco Ren never knew he had done that, either. He thought he had simply gone home. He would have been bewildered to learn that his decision to not chase a beaten enemy was studied in the war colleges of a dozen species as the moment the age of the duel ended. He was bad at sitting still and good at math, and he had wanted, more than anything, to bring his crew home, and so he had, and the galaxy rearranged itself behind him while he did it, and he never looked back to see. You had 1 barge left within reach of the Scout Warden, yours, the flag barge of the 9th Talon, and you, the Warden whose whole duty had been to keep the sacred circle that your own first champion broke. The rest of the host was gone, or going, scattering across the Sable Drift, 110 hulls dead by their own hands, and the rest fleeing toward home, with the fear of 4,000 years curdling in them. You could have fled too. You had the speed, but you did not flee, and it was not courage. It was that you had to know. You had to be the one to stand in the wreck of everything your people were, and look at the small gray ship that had ended it, because if you did not look, you would spend the rest of your life telling yourself it had been a trick, a weapon, a war god, anything but the truth. So you brought the flag barge slow and alone into the broken center of the drift, weapons cold, and you opened a single channel to the scout, and you spoke to the human directly, the first and last time any Veshikar would. You asked him how, that was all. One word, in his language, through your half-broken translator, the same poor channel he had been hearing your heralds on all this time. How? And Eco Ren, who was so tired he could barely hold his head up, who had just watched a war host run from him and felt nothing but the bone-deep emptiness of a man who has outlived everyone he flew with, answered you. Not because he wanted to, because you had asked, and he was the kind of young man who answered when asked, even now, even you. He told you he had not been trying to win. He told you he had only been trying to stay alive, 1/2 second at a time, the way he had been trained, because he was a survey pilot, and survey pilots were too small to take a hit, and so they learned to never be where the hit was. He told you he did not understand most of what your heralds had been saying. He told you that when the big ships came, one at a time, he had been grateful, because one at a time was the only fight a ship his size could ever live through, and he had not known until just now that you had been doing it on purpose, that it was some law of yours, and that he was sorry, sort of, that the law had cost you so much. He was apologizing to you, Warden. The last living man of a fleet you had murdered, sitting in a cockpit full of his dead, was apologizing for the way your own law had destroyed your war host. That is when you understood that your people had never faced anything like him, and never would again, because the thing that beat you was not malice, and not genius, and not a weapon. It was a tired young man who had simply refused to stop, and who was decent enough to feel a little bad about what your refusal to break a rule had done to you. You asked him one more thing. You asked why he had answered the herald at all. A scout, a runt. Why had he stood up for a fleet that was already dead, in a fight he could not win? And Eco Ren was quiet for a long moment, and then he said the thing your kind would carry for the rest of your history, the thing that ended the Veshikar as a terror, and began them as something smaller and more honest. He said, because someone asked who would stand, and I was the only one left, so it had to be me. That was all. No defiance in it, no threat. Just a fact, the way a survey pilot states a fact. The herald had asked who would stand. Everyone else was dead, so it had to be him. There was no choosing in it, no glory, no plan. There was one man left, and a question. And the man stood up, because standing up was what was left to do. You did not fire on him, Warden. You could have. Your barge was whole, and his ship was a dying ember with no shots left. One lance and the runt that had broken your war host would have been gone, and you could have told the Reach whatever you wanted. But you did not, and it was not mercy, and it was not fear. It was that firing on him would have been the last and deepest breaking of the circle, and you, the Warden whose only duty was the circle, could not be the one to do it, not after everything. The duel was over. He had stood. He had won, 3 times over, and then your own host had finished the job he never asked to do. To kill him now would not be a duel. It would be a swarm crushing a survivor, and you would have become, finally and forever, the vermin your kind had always called everyone else. So you did the thing the law required, the thing your people had done 41 times before, and never once like this. You marked the survivor to live, and you let him carry the wound home. Except this time, the wound was not humanity's. This time, the wound was yours. This time, the survivor your law spared would limp back to his kind, half dead, in a cracked scout full of his crew, and the story burned into him would not be a story of human fear. It would be the story of how one human in the smallest ship on the field broke the greatest war host in the Reach and made it run, and that story would travel, the way the carried wounds always traveled, to every species that had ever feared the Veshikar. You gave Long Way Home a clear lane home. You did it on the open channel, where the 41 watching species could see. You announced, in the old ritual words, that the human champion had won the duel and earned the survivor's mercy, and you let him go. It was the only move left that let your people be anything but a beaten swarm. You dressed the ruin in the last rag of your law, and you let the small gray ship limp away into the dark toward human space. And you watched it go, and you knew the watching never would have spared him if your champions had simply not been beaten, and that none of this would have happened if you had not, in your pride, picked the smallest ship on the field to be the one that lived. You had chosen the wound yourself. You had marked it to survive. He wasn't meant to survive. You meant him to survive. That was your whole law, the survivor sent home. And your law had handed the one unkillable thing on the field, the one thing it needed, which was permission to keep flying. Eco Ren did not understand he had been spared. He thought, watching your barge hold its fire and open a lane, that you were simply too damaged to chase, or that you had lost your nerve, or that the universe had run out of reasons to kill him for the moment. He turned the scout's nose toward home on one cracked engine, set the long, slow course, and only then, with the war host gone and the lane open and the dead quiet around him, did he let himself stop. He did not celebrate. He sat in the cockpit of Long Way Home, in the wreck-strewn dark of the Sable Drift, and he wept, alone, for the 41 people he had flown out with, and the one captain strapped cold beside him, and there was no one in the galaxy to see it, but you, Warden, on a channel you forgot to close. You heard the human champion who had broken your war host crying for his dead, and it was the most human sound you had ever heard, and it told you more about why your people had lost than any weapon ever could. Your champions had fought for glory. He had fought because the people he loved were dead, and the herald asked who would stand. One of those reasons can be beaten, the other one cannot. There is a part of the homecoming you would have wanted to see, Warden, the part that happened after the cameras, and the people who wanted to make him a hero had all gone away. When the human authorities finally pieced together what had occurred at the Sable Drift, when the telemetry and the recordings left no doubt that one survey scout had broken a war host of 300 barges, they did not at first believe it. They thought it must be an error, a misread of the sensor logs, because the thing the logs described was not possible by anything human ships were known to do. They pulled Eco Ren into a room, and they asked him to explain it, the same word you had asked him. How? And he told them the same thing he had told you, almost word for word, because it was the truth, and the truth does not change with the audience. He told them he had not been trying to win. He told them about flying small and close, about the flex joint and the vent and the keel seam, about the circle the enemy would not break, and the way he had used it to keep the duel running so the rest could not fire. He told them about the charge, and the gaps, and the way a host that had never flown crowded had torn itself apart around him. He laid it all out, flat and clear, a survey pilot's report. And when he was done, the room was silent, and one of the senior officers asked him the question that was really on everyone's mind. The officer asked whether he understood what he had done. Iko Ren thought about it for a while, the records say, and then he said no. He said he understood what had happened, every piece of it, the physics and the flying, and the way the enemy's own law had killed them. But he did not understand what they meant by what he had done, because to him, he had not done a great thing. He had flown the way he flew, the enemy had beaten itself. The 41 who died had bought the time. He had only kept his ship alive and brought his crew home. And any survey pilot, he said, would have done the same. Because any survey pilot was trained the same, to never be where the hit was. He genuinely believed that. He believed that what he had done was ordinary, that the only reason it looked extraordinary was that no one had ever put a survey pilot in that particular impossible spot before. He was wrong about that, and right about it, both at once. And that is the thing your people came to understand, and his never quite said out loud. He was right that any human survey pilot was trained the same way. He was wrong that any of them would have done it, because the training was not the thing. The training only taught a pilot how to not be hit. It did not teach a pilot to answer a herald with a dead fleet behind him and 300 barges ahead. It did not teach a man to keep flying for 2 hours in a dying ship past the point where flying could possibly matter. It did not teach the thing he said to his dead captain in the dark, "We held," or the thing he said to you at the end, that he had stood because he was the only one left, so it had to be him. The training was just the hands. The rest was Iko Ren, and there was only one of him, and the galaxy was lucky beyond reckoning that the one of him had been the one man left alive in the Sable Drift on that day. They let him go back to flying survey routes because he asked, and because no one had any idea what else to do with a man like that. They could not make him a commander, because he did not want to command. They could not make him a symbol, because he refused to stand still long enough to be one. They could not even make him talk about it, because every time they tried, he turned the talk back to the 41 who died, until the people asking gave up and let him be. So they gave him a small ship and the quiet edge of human space, and he disappeared into the work he loved, mapping rocks, the smallest thing in every sky he entered, exactly as he had always been. Once, years later, a young survey cadet who did not know who the quiet older pilot was, asked him, on a long boring shift mapping a debris field, whether he had ever been in a real fight. The records of that conversation exist because the cadet wrote them down afterward, when she finally learned who she had been flying beside. Iko Ren was quiet for a while, the cadet wrote, and then he said yes, once, a long time ago. The cadet asked if he had won, and the older pilot looked out at the rocks for a long moment and said no, he had not won. He had survived. Those were different things, he said, and the better one was surviving, and anyone who told her otherwise had never been in a fight worth the name. The cadet did not understand that until she learned, much later, exactly what fight he had survived. And then she understood it completely, and she never forgot it, and she taught it to her own cadets when she became an instructor, the way the lesson of the Sable Drift came to be taught to every small ship pilot in human space. Do not try to win, try to survive. Be too small to be hit, and never stop, and let the enemy beat itself, and bring your crew home. It is a small lesson. It does not sound like the lesson that ended an empire, but it was, and the man who taught it never once thought of himself as anything but a pilot who was good at math and bad at sitting still. The voyage home took 11 days. 11 days alone in a cracked Scout, one engine, rationing the air, the bodies of his crew secured in the cold of the aft hold, because Iko Ren would not leave them in the drift, would not let the dark have them, was going to bring every one of them home if it killed him, and it nearly did. He arrived at the human outer station with his ship a guttering ruin, and himself barely conscious, and he did not say, when they pulled him out, that he had broken a war host. He said only that he had brought the crew home. He gave them the names. He had kept the names. 41 names, recited to a station officer who did not yet understand what the broken boy in the survey scout had done, and would not understand until the long-range telemetry came in, and the recordings of the Sable Drift were pieced together, and the whole of human space went very, very quiet. They wanted to make him a war hero. He would not let them. He stood in front of the people who wanted to put medals on him, and he told them, in plain words, that he had not won anything, that the enemy had beaten itself, that he had only flown the way any survey pilot flew, that the real fight had been the 41 who died buying the scouts time to run, and that if anyone deserved a story, it was them, not him. He said it the way he said everything, like a fact, and the people who had come to celebrate him went quiet, because they understood, slowly, that the boy was telling the truth, and that the truth was bigger than any medal they had. He went back to flying survey routes within the year. He asked for it. He said he was good at math and bad at sitting still, and that the quiet edge of human space had rocks that needed mapping. They tried to give him a battleship. He turned it down. He said he did not want a ship that traded blows. He wanted a small ship that was too little to be hit, because that, he said, was the only kind of flying he was any good at, and the only kind he could live with. So they gave him a new survey scout, and he named it Long Way Home, the same as the last, and he went back out to the quiet edge to map the rocks, and most of the people he flew past out there never knew that the unremarkable man in the little gray ship had once stood alone against 300 barges and not lost. That is how humans tell it now, Warden. They do not tell it as a war story. They tell it as the story of a survey pilot who would not stop flying, and they tell it small, on purpose, because the man it is about would have wanted it told small. Your people tell it differently, and that is the part you owe the record. The HFY war host never recovered. It could not. You went home and tried to put the old shape back on, the sacred duel, the single combat that decides the many. But the 41 species you had ruled by fear had all watched the sable drift, and the carried wound you sent home had done exactly what carried wounds were always meant to do. It taught every species in the Reach that the great HFY war host, the thing that fought one champion at a time and never broke the circle, could be ridden down to ruin by a single small ship that simply refused to be hit and refused to stop. One by one the conquered unknelt. Not in a year, as some empires fall, but slowly, surely, the fear draining out of the Reach, the way water drains from a cracked basin, until the HFY were no longer a terror, but only a people, large and proud, and finally, mercifully, ordinary. You stopped sending heralds. You stopped marking survivors. There was no point in a carried wound anymore, because the galaxy had already received the only wound that ever mattered, and it had come not from your strength, but from the one time your strength met something it had no ritual for. Your kind learned to fight in fleets after that, the human way, the crude way you had always despised, because the duel had died in the sable drift, and a people that wants to survive learns the lessons its enemies teach it. You became, in the end, students of the thing that beat you, and the first lesson, the one your young are taught now before any other, is the lesson Uiko Ren taught without ever meaning to. The smallest thing in the sky is not the safest one to spare. You kept the recording, Warden, the one you forgot to close, the human champion weeping for his dead in the broken dark. You were not supposed to. The host wanted it destroyed, the proof of the day the HFY ran. But you kept it, all these years, because it was the only true thing your people had from the sable drift, and because somewhere in it was the answer to the one word you asked him and never fully understood. How? How had a runt in a cracked scout broken the greatest war host the Reach had ever known? You know the answer now. It was not the survey lance, which fired 3 times and killed 3 champions, only because he aimed it at fault lines no one else could see. It was not the flying, though no HFY had ever flown like that, or ever would. It was not even your own law, the circle, the ladder, the host, that charged badly and tore itself apart in its fear. Those were only the shape of the answer. The answer was that he was not meant to survive, and he survived anyway, and in surviving he destroyed everything you were. He was the wound your law required you to spare, the smallest, ugliest, most broken thing on the field, the obvious one to mark and send home. And he went home, in 11 days, on one cracked engine, with his dead aboard and the whole Reach watching, and the story he carried was the end of your people as a terror, and the beginning of a galaxy, your kind no longer ruled by fear. You marked him to live, Warden. You meant it as the last small cruelty, the survivor scarred and sent to teach. You taught the whole galaxy instead, You taught it that there is a kind of enemy that cannot be dueled, cannot be hunted, cannot be made to kneel, because it does not fight for glory, and it does not fight for fear. It fights because someone asked who would stand, and it was the only one left. And there is no ritual in any law, 4,000 years deep, or 40,000, that can beat a thing like that, because it has already accepted the only outcome you have to offer, and a creature that has accepted death and stands up anyway is the one weapon no war host can ever take away. His name was Eco Ren. He was 20 years old in 11 days. He flew the smallest ship on the field, and he was not meant to survive, and instead, he destroyed the enemy fleet, and then he went home and mapped rocks, and never once called himself a hero. You called him the Wound. The galaxy calls him the reason the Veshikar are not a terror anymore. And somewhere out on the quiet edge of human space, an unremarkable man in a little gray ship is still flying, small and close and impossible to hit, mapping the dark one rock at a time, and if you ever crossed his path again, Warden, you would not know him, and that is exactly how he would want it. He said it to the dead, and the dead could not answer, but the whole galaxy did.